I was grocery shopping when a man approached me and whispered in my ear, "Even though we don't know each other, I need to tell you something. In 3 days, something will happen. You'll have to make a choice. Choose what you least want to choose." I thought he was crazy. 3 days later, I got a call. But before I continue, check if you've subscribed to the channel and share in the comments where you're watching us from. We'd love to know how far our revenge stories reach. The morning sky over Atlanta was clear, not a single cloud. I woke up with that sense of peace I'd grown accustomed to. Today was Wednesday, and my weekly trip to the big supermarket had become a deeply ingrained part of my routine. The shopping cart made a constant metallic sound as it rolled over the shiny ceramic floor of the supermarket. I stopped in the produce section, where the vibrant colors always managed to lift my spirits. I ran my hand over some avocados, feeling their rough skin and perfect texture. Everything felt familiar. Everything was pleasant. I bent down to pick a fresh bunch of cilantro. Just then, I felt a presence too close, uncomfortably near. A shadow fell over me, blocking the light from the fluorescent tubes in the ceiling. A feeling of unease tightened in my chest. I looked up. A middle-aged man stood there. He wore a worn, faded plaid shirt. What struck me most was his gaunt face, with prominent, deep cheekbones. The dark circles under his eyes looked like thick ink stains, and his eyes were bloodshot. But the strangest thing was that he wasn't looking at the fresh vegetables in front of him. His gaze was fixed on me. It was a direct, penetrating stare, with no attempt to disguise it. By reflex, I took a step back, clutching the metal edge of the cart as if it were a shield. But he also took a step toward me, neither fast nor slow, closing the distance I had tried to create. The space around us seemed to shrink. It was just him and me. He quickly looked both ways with a furtive gesture, as if fearing being watched or heard. Then, with a sudden movement that startled me, he leaned in and brought his mouth close to my ear. His breath was warm, loaded with the smell of cheap coffee and old tobacco. With each breath, I felt his urgency, his tension. "In 3 days, you're going to have to make a decision," he whispered in a hoarse, hurried voice, so fast that I had to strain to understand him. "Choose what you least want to choose." My body remained motionless, as if frozen. Those seemingly meaningless words, laden with a strange weight, pierced my mind. A choice. What I least want. What did that mean? I wanted to scream, push him away, ask him what he meant. But when I reacted, when I sharply turned my head to confront him, no one was there beside me. He had disappeared. I looked around in desperation. The aisles were still full of people. A young couple laughed as they chose apples. Children begged their mother for candy. No one seemed to have noticed anything. No one acted unusually. That man was as if he had never existed, as if he had vanished into thin air. My hand began to tremble uncontrollably. The bunch of cilantro fell to the floor. At the same time, an avocado rolled out of the cart. It spun on the floor and stopped right in front of a woman's feet. She smiled at me kindly, picked it up, and handed it to me. "Be careful, ma'am," she said. Her soft voice brought me back to the present, but at the same time, it made the previous encounter feel even more unreal, like a lucid dream. I tried to continue shopping, pushing the cart aimlessly, but my mind was blank. The stranger's words kept repeating in my head like an unsettling refrain. I passed the bakery section, full of delicious aromas, and forgot to buy the bread that Michael likes. I reached the meat section without remembering what dish I wanted to prepare. When I returned home, I put the groceries in the refrigerator mechanically, without thinking. I collapsed onto the wooden chair in the kitchen, exhausted. Outside, the bougainvillea that Richard, my late husband, had planted with his own hands, bloomed with radiant bouquets under the afternoon sun. He used to say that the color of bougainvillea was the color of eternal joy. But today, I feel no joy. My gaze wanders through the garden and stops at the family photo hanging on the wall. A photo already faded by time, Richard with a radiant smile. I cuddled into his shoulder, and Michael, our little boy, showing his little teeth with a big smile. I'm Mary Alice Jenkins. I'm 65 years old. Since Richard left this world, my great universe has shrunk to fit perfectly into Michael's figure. He is my reason for living, my pride, the most valuable treasure my husband left me. I still remember clearly when he was a mischievous child. He had a worn toy police uniform and a plastic whistle. Every afternoon, he stood very seriously on the neighborhood corner, blowing the whistle loudly to direct the traffic of children on bicycles. His dream of wearing a real uniform never changed, and he achieved it. Seeing my son become an upright traffic officer made me see Richard in him, firm and trustworthy. The day Michael married Chloe Davis, I cried with emotion at our first meeting. Chloe brought a box of sweet pastries and sweetly told me it was from the best bakery in the city, which she had searched for with great care. She had a luminous smile, bright eyes, and a charming way of speaking. She always called me Mama, with great affection. She seemed to have everything one expects from a daughter-in-law, someone who would build a happy home with my son. I believed it. But then small details began to appear, like tiny cracks in a perfect vase. At first, I ignored them, thinking maybe it was my age or that I was imagining things. About 6 months ago, one Sunday morning, Chloe said she would go to the farmer's market to buy fresh ingredients for the family lunch. She left at 9 a.m. Noon passed, then the afternoon, and I called her several times without success. She didn't return until 3 p.m. She didn't bring a single bag of vegetables, only a new, expensive-looking briefcase. She laughed and explained, "Sorry, Mama. I ran into a childhood friend, and we started drinking coffee. Time got away from us." But her silk dress was still impeccable, and her heels didn't have a speck of market dust. I nodded, but a small doubt began to sprout in my heart. Then there were nights when I saw Michael sitting alone on the porch, smoking in silence, his gaze lost on the TV. A Falcons game, his favorite team, was on, but he didn't seem to be paying attention. He looked tired and overwhelmed when I brought him a cup of chamomile tea, ready to ask him what was wrong. Chloe would immediately appear from behind, put an arm around his shoulder, and say with unusual enthusiasm, "He's tired from work, Mama. There are a lot of problems on the streets lately." Then she would drag him inside, cutting off any attempt at conversation between us before it started, that eagerness of hers to protect him. I don't know why. It gave me a sense of control, not care. The most unsettling memory was once when I was watering the plants in the backyard. By chance, I looked through their bedroom window. The curtains were not yet fully closed. Michael was in the bathroom. I could hear the water running. I saw Chloe taking his cell phone. Her face no longer had that tender air, but an expression of intense, tense concentration. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen, as if searching for something. Suddenly, as if she felt it, she looked up and met my gaze through the glass. She started. A flash of bewilderment crossed her face, but she quickly forced a smile. She hurriedly put down the phone, grabbed a rag, and pretended to wipe dust from the nearby dresser. At that instant, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The culmination was last month. I needed duct tape to close an old box, and I remembered that Michael had a roll stored in his study. I knocked on his office door and entered. I saw Michael on tiptoes, putting some bulging envelopes into an old shoebox that he then hid above the closet. When he saw me, his face tightened, and he looked uncomfortable. He quickly said in a somewhat broken voice, "Oh, it's nothing, Mama. It's just a bonus I was saving. I want to surprise Chloe." But his voice didn't have the joy of someone preparing a gift for his wife. It sounded more like someone hiding a heavy secret. Every time something like that happened, I would calm myself down. I would look at Richard's photo and silently tell myself, "Surely, I'm old, and I'm imagining it. Right, honey, I shouldn't be a nagging mother-in-law who distrusts everything." I was afraid of ruining the peace they had. I chose to believe in that false harmony. I decided to ignore the signs to maintain calm on the surface. But now, sitting alone in this silent kitchen, the warning from that strange man in the supermarket was like a huge stone thrown directly into the lake. Calm. It didn't just create ripples, it was a tsunami that swept away all my denial. The loose pieces, the suspicious images I had tried to bury, now came to light, fitting into a terrifying picture. The next 2 days passed in dense silence. Thursday and Friday, every sound in the house, from Michael's key entering the lock when he returned from work to the clinking of cups when Chloe made coffee, startled me. I watched them, trying to find a sign, an explanation for all that unease growing inside me. But outwardly, everything remained the same. Chloe still called me Mama sweetly. And Michael still kissed my forehead before going to work. That feigned peace was scarier than an open fight. Little by little, I convinced myself that the stranger's words in the supermarket were nothing more than the product of an old woman's paranoia. And then the third day arrived. Friday morning, while watering the geraniums on the porch, the phone rang. It was Sophia, my lifelong friend. Her cheerful voice sounded on the other end of the line. "Mary, what are you doing with this beautiful weather? Are you staying cooped up at home? I just made some amazing chili. Get in the car and come to Lake Lanier. Let's catch up." Sophia's invitation was like a fresh breeze that dispelled the dark cloud that had hovered over me for the past 2 days. I had almost forgotten the warning. I drove to Lake Lanier, the fresh air by the lake, the murmur of the waves hitting the shore, and the meaningless chatter with Sophia completely enveloped me. We sat on her porch, drinking lemonade while flipping through an old photo album. Black and white photos of us in school uniforms with braids, yellowed color images of little Michael riding a wooden horse. An entire day passed between laughter and sweet memories. In the afternoon, Michael called me. His voice sounded somewhat hurried and tense on the phone. "Mama, are you at Aunt Sophia's? Great. Stay for dinner there tonight. Chloe and I are going to be late." I gladly accepted, suspecting nothing. Happy to spend more time with my friend, I even felt relieved. I stayed for dinner with Sophia's family. The meal was full of laughter and trivial chatter that made me lose track of time. When I looked at the clock, it was almost 9 p.m., so I said goodbye hastily to drive back to Atlanta. The road back was deserted. But as soon as I turned the corner of my street, a feeling of unease squeezed my chest. Michael's living room lights were on, casting a dazzling glow on the dark street, and his car wasn't properly parked inside the garage, as always, but crooked in front of the gate, with one wheel on the curb, as if the driver had slammed on the brakes and fled in a panic. My heart pounded. As soon as I got out of the car, and before putting the key in the gate, I heard screams coming from inside. It wasn't a normal argument. Michael's voice sounded hoarse, uttering each word with rage and heartbreaking pain. Chloe's, however, was shrill, sharp, cutting like a knife. Trembling, I pushed the door. It wasn't locked. The scene I saw inside left me paralyzed, breathless. A table lamp lay overturned on the floor. Its dim light illuminated scattered glass fragments, white papers strewn everywhere. Michael was in the middle of the living room, his back to the door. He clutched a crumpled bunch of papers so tightly that his arms trembled. In front of him, Chloe leaned against a sofa, arms crossed, with an icy, defiant smile, no trace of remorse. I entered and asked in a broken voice, "What's happening, children?" Both turned. Michael looked at me like a cornered child, pleading for help. "Mama," he said in a choked voice. "She forged my signature." He held up the crumpled papers as proof of his accusation. Chloe let out a sarcastic chuckle, a cold sound that echoed in the tense room. "Don't exaggerate, Michael. I just thought they were administrative procedures to facilitate things at work." "Facilitate work?" Michael roared, releasing the contained fury. He slammed the papers onto the coffee table. The sheets flew everywhere. "This is a contract to transfer all my assets. The house Dad left me, the car, everything in your name. Do you think I'm an idiot, Chloe? I've been suspecting you for a while." The air froze. I looked at Chloe, searching her eyes for an explanation. A mistake, something to refute it. "Chloe, honey, it won't be a misunderstanding. Surely it wasn't your intention." But she didn't even look at me. Her icy gaze remained fixed on Michael. "If you don't trust me anymore, let's get a divorce. I can't live with a husband who distrusts me like an old gossip." Michael froze at the cruelty of her words. Then he gritted his teeth and said between them, "I won't sign anything until we clarify this." "You're not going anywhere." Chloe just raised an eyebrow arrogantly. She took her purse from the sofa and walked toward the door. Suddenly she turned. Her eyes shone with a veiled threat. "Then think about it carefully," she said slowly. "Before things get worse for you." She opened the door and slammed it shut. The noise echoed through the house like a gunshot, leaving a deadly silence. Michael remained standing in the same spot. Then, as if all his energy had abandoned him, he collapsed onto the sofa, his head in his hands, completely defeated. In that instant of overwhelming silence, A chill ran down my spine. A cold truth struck me. Today is Friday. Exactly 3 days since Wednesday morning at the supermarket. The whisper of that unknown man resonated in my head, no longer diffuse but clear and terrifying, like a curse that had come true. The house was plunged into a thick, suffocating silence. Only the ticking of the wall clock could be heard, sounding indifferently, with cruel regularity, marking the rhythm of the collapse unfolding before my eyes. Michael remained seated there on the sofa, his hands buried in his hair, the broad back of an adult man, now hunched like that of a wounded child. I couldn't stay still. The chaos outside had to be ordered to calm the chaos inside. I approached and picked up the fallen table lamp. The broken glass crunched under my feet. I carefully placed it on the table, even though it could no longer be turned on. Then I began to pick up the scattered leaves on the floor. I picked them up one by one, slowly, carefully, smoothing with my fingers each furious wrinkle in the paper, and stacked them neatly on the coffee table. I needed to do something to stop my hands from trembling, to give my mind a point of support, however fragile. After putting everything in its place, I went to the kitchen like a deeply ingrained reflex. I prepared 2 cups of tea, putting a chamomile tea bag in each. The soft aroma of herbal tea floated in the air. Trying to erase the bitter taste of lies, I placed a steaming cup on the table, right in front of Michael. I sat beside him on the edge of the sofa. I rested my hand on his shoulder, a soft but firm touch. His shoulder trembled slightly and then relaxed under my hand. "Tell Mama, son." My voice was very low, but in the midst of that silence, it was heard with total clarity. Michael slowly raised his head. His eyes, my son's eyes, were red and full of a pain I had never seen before. He took the cup, took a large sip, as if trying to swallow the bitterness stuck in his throat as well. And then he began to speak. The words came out at first hesitant, broken, and then like a broken dam. He said the suspicions began months ago with strange credit card statements he found by chance. There were huge expenses at luxurious jewelry stores on Peachtree Street. But he had never seen Chloe wearing any of those pieces. When he asked her, she just smiled and said they were gifts for business associates to maintain good relationships. He talked about midnight phone calls. Chloe would stealthily go out onto the balcony to talk in a whispering voice like a snake, turning her back to the house. If he caught her, she would hang up immediately, explaining that it was a close friend going through a marital crisis and that it wasn't appropriate for him to listen. He said that after noticing some important papers related to the house property were out of place, he secretly decided to install a small camera, the kind used to monitor babies, in his office. He told me this with shame, in a muffled voice. "I know it was wrong, Mama. A cop spying on his own wife in his own house. I felt like a coward, but I had no other choice." And then the nightmare arrived just today. His shift was suddenly cancelled due to a last-minute change from his superiors. He didn't say anything and drove straight home with the intention of surprising Chloe, but the surprise was for him. As soon as he parked in front of the gate, a premonition prompted him to open the camera app on his cell phone. And there he saw everything, clearly on the small screen. Chloe was sitting at the desk where he kept all the important documents. Beside her was a sheet with his true signature. She was practicing again and again how to sign the name Michael Jenkins on a test sheet, comparing each stroke from the inclination of the M to the last hook of the S. When she saw that it was identical, she took the expensive fountain pen he had given her, and with complete calm, she used it to sign the real contract. He said that at that moment he felt his blood freeze. He rushed into the house and caught them in the act. The fight broke out at that very moment and reached its climax, just as I arrived. Listening to what Michael told me, all the loose pieces I had seen began to fit together, forming a complete and cruelly ugly picture. That time Chloe went shopping and didn't bring a single bag, the envelopes full of bills hidden in a shoebox, the nights he sat absorbed on the porch. Everything had an explanation. Rage began to boil inside me, stronger than astonishment or pain. This was not a mistake. It was a calculated plan, a brutal and masterful deception. I squeezed my son's hand hard. Damn it. That girl deceived us all. Michael couldn't hold it anymore. He leaned on my shoulder, and for the first time in many years, since his father died, he cried like a child. His crying was broken, full of rage and sadness. "What do I do, Mama?" I trusted her. I trusted her blindly. I hugged him, that big body that trembled as when he was little, and I stroked his back. For a moment, the words of the strange man echoed in my head again. Choose what you least want to do. What was the choice now? To keep quiet and see my son lose everything, his money, his honor at the hands of a swindler, or to bring everything to light? To face a noisy divorce scandal and expose our family's pain to public opinion? Both options were hell. I looked at the papers on the table, the forged signatures that seemed to mock us. I took a deep breath. The weakness, the bewilderment inside me disappeared. In its place appeared the iron determination of a mother who would protect her son at all costs. Don't be afraid, Michael, I said with a surprisingly firm voice. I won't let her destroy you or this family. Leave it to me. I looked him straight in the eyes, full of tears. I know exactly who I have to call. That night, when Michael finally fell asleep on the sofa, exhausted, I was left alone in the living room. The yellow light from the street filtered through the window, drawing long lines on the floor. The silence no longer scared me. It had become my ally, the necessary space for my determination to crystallize. I went to Richard's old bookshelf and took out his worn-backed contact notebook. The leather of the notebook was soft with age, and when I opened it, the smell of old paper enveloped me. I looked for the A section. There it was, carefully tucked away, a yellowed business card. Aranda Investigations. Truth is Power. John Aranda, a retired private detective, an old friend of Richard's, whom my husband always trusted completely. The next morning, I woke Michael. His eyes were still swollen, but he looked a little more alive. Today, you're going to work as usual, I told him firmly. Greet her, kiss her, act as if nothing is happening. Don't let her see any sign of change. Can you do it? Michael looked at me with confidence and nodded with determination. When he had left, I sat in front of the phone. I took a deep breath and dialed Mr. Aranda's number. A grave, trustworthy voice, just as I remembered it, sounded on the other end. I didn't give him many details over the phone. I just told him that I, Richard Jenkins's wife, needed his help with a delicate family matter. We agreed to meet an hour later at an old downtown cafe, an almost empty place where secret stories could be told without fear of curious ears. Mr. Aranda looked much older than I remembered. His hair was completely white, and the wrinkles around his eyes were more pronounced, but his gaze was still as sharp as a knife. He shook my hand and squeezed it gently. I'm so sorry about Richard, Mary. He was a good man. His condolences, though late, made my eyes burn. I didn't beat around the bush. I told him everything, from the smallest suspicions, Chloe's insignificant lies, to the moment we discovered her last night. I placed a copy of the property transfer contract on the table. Mr. Aranda listened very carefully, without interrupting me once. He didn't take his eyes off me, and every now and then, he just nodded and wrote a few lines in a small notebook. When I finished telling him everything, he remained silent for a long time. Then he looked at me and said, I will help you, but promise me something, Mary. From this moment on, act as if nothing is happening. Be a normal mother-in-law. Leave the rest to me. But I couldn't sit idly by while Mr. Aranda began his professional investigation. I started mine. I waited for Michael to go to work, and Chloe had also left early. The house was empty. My heart pounded as I approached the door to their bedroom. I felt enormous guilt. I felt like a thief invading privacy in my own son's house. But then the image of Michael's tear-soaked face the night before dispelled any doubt. I started with Chloe's closet. I checked every pocket, every drawer. In the pocket of a winter coat she almost never wore, my hand touched something metallic and cold. It was a strange key. It wasn't for the house or the car. Attached to it was a small piece of paper with a series of numbers, 34B. I immediately took a picture of it with my cell phone. Then I continued with the dresser. Under the velvet lining of the jewelry box, I found a copy of a birth certificate folded in four. I was startled when I opened it. Chloe's birthplace was not Atlanta, as she always proudly said, but Savannah, a city in Georgia known for its complexities. Another lie was exposed. Most importantly, I entered Michael's office. I took out his old passport, his driver's license, and a birthday card he had written me last year. I spread them on the table, arranged next to the forged contract. I took Richard's old magnifying glass from the drawer. Under the lamp's light and the magnifying lens, the differences were obvious. The M in Michael's name, written by my son, always had a small, soft, familiar hook at the end. But the fake signature was rigid and straight, a soulless imitation. His letter O was round and even, while the one in the fake signature was deformed, as if the writer had hesitated for an instant. The differences were subtle, but opposite. Side by side, they were undeniable. I took detailed photos of each comparison. A few days later, Mr. Aranda called me. His voice on the other end of the line was still grave and measured, but each of his words fell like a hammer blow. "I've found it, Mary. Chloe Davis has a safe deposit box at SunTrust Bank, a bank where Michael doesn't have any accounts. The box number is 34B. My heart sank. It was the same series of numbers I had found. More importantly, he continued, she has a savings account in her maiden name, Chloe Ortega Rojas. The current balance is over $2 million. That money was deposited little by little, steadily, over the past 2 years. That night, while cleaning the house, I accidentally dropped Chloe's laundry basket. The clothes spilled onto the floor, and a crumpled ATM receipt rolled out from inside a rolled-up sock. I picked it up without thinking much, and then my eyes fixed on the numbers. It was a cash withdrawal transaction from an account with the same last 4 digits of the secret account that Mr. Aranda had just revealed to me. Everything was too clear. There were no longer any doubts. I sat on the floor, amidst the dirty clothes, clutching that small piece of paper that weighed like a ton. Then I got up, went to the room, and took out everything I had found. The photo of the key, the copy of the birth certificate, the images comparing the signatures, and now also the ATM receipt. Carefully, I put everything in a large, brown envelope. I sealed it. The storm had not yet arrived, but I had my weapon ready. I was prepared. 3 days after Mr. Aranda's call, Chloe returned. During those 3 days, Michael and I lived in a strange calm, a tranquility before the storm. We spoke less, but every glance we exchanged was full of understanding. The brown envelope with the truth rested in my desk drawer, as heavy as a time bomb. I was in the kitchen kneading dough to make bread when I heard the sound of a key turning in the lock. A familiar sound, but that day it chilled me to the bone. The door opened. Chloe walked in calmly, as if she had just returned from the supermarket and not after disappearing after a brutal fight. She was no longer the simple daughter-in-law I knew. She wore an elegant, perfectly tailored cream-colored office suit that highlighted her figure. Her hair was pulled back in a high bun, not a single hair out of place. Her face was precisely made up, hiding all emotion, leaving only a cold and professional expression. In her hand, she carried a thin, leather briefcase that radiated a type of unknown and terrifying power. Michael was sitting in the living room reading the newspaper. He had arrived earlier than I had asked. Perhaps his intuition had also warned him of something. Hearing the door, he looked up, seeing Chloe, his body tensed, the newspaper in his hands crumpled without him realizing it. He stood up abruptly, his face tense, ready for a confrontation, but Chloe didn't even look at him. Her gaze passed over him as if he were just another piece of furniture. She went straight to the oak coffee table. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick wad of documents. She placed them on the table with a soft but firm touch, a dry sound that echoed in the silent room. "Divorce," she said in a cold voice, without a hint of emotion. "I've already filled out my part. You just have to sign here, here, and here." Her long, wine-red painted finger pointed to 3 places on the paper. "Let's not make this more complicated than necessary. We'll divide the current assets. Of course, this house will go to me as a small compensation for all the emotional damage I had to endure." Michael stared at the papers, his fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white, but he said nothing. He just remained silent, a deafening silence. That silence seemed to fuel Chloe's confidence even more. She believed she had already won. It was then that I came out of the kitchen. The sound of my steps on the ceramic floor made them both turn to look. This time, I wasn't carrying a tray with tea, but the brown envelope with the documents. I walked calmly to the table and placed my envelope right next to Chloe's divorce papers. The sound was softer, but denser than her arrogant thud. If you really want to go to court, I said in a clear, unwavering voice, then go ahead. Chloe's eyes showed a flash of surprise before turning to disdain. What did she think I was going to do? An old woman? What could I do? I opened the envelope. I took out each item and spread them on the table, shining like a player revealing her decisive cards. This, I said, pushing the bank statement toward her, is the extract from a secret bank account in your maiden name, Chloe Ortega Rojas, with a balance you never explained to your husband. Chloe's perfectly made-up face lost a little color. I placed the detailed photos on the table. This is the image of your forged signature on the property transfer contract, placed next to Michael's real signature for comparison. I think any handwriting expert would be very interested in this. Her red lips tightened forcefully. And this? I said, pushing the last photo toward her, an image of a key and a note with a number. It's the information about safe deposit box number 34B at SunTrust Bank that you've been hiding from your husband for 2 years. I looked up and met her eyes directly, eyes that could no longer hide her bewilderment. I don't think we need this divorce paper, Chloe. This time, everything will be resolved publicly before a judge with all the evidence of your acts, fraud, forgery of signature, and concealment of assets. Chloe froze. The perfect mask she wore shattered. She looked from the pile of irrefutable documents on the table to my firm face, and then to Michael, who was frozen by what he had just heard for the first time. I saw true panic in her eyes, the panic of a cornered beast. But it only lasted an instant. Quickly, the panic vanished, giving way to something darker and more venomous. Suddenly, she let out a hollow, joyless laugh, a chilling sound that bubbled from her throat. She raised her head and adjusted an imaginary lock of hair. "Do you really think you've won, Mrs. Jenkins?" she said slowly, word by word, as if spitting venom. "Do you think these little papers are everything?" Her gaze shifted from me and fixed on Michael. "You have no idea what your dear son did." I turned to Michael and felt as if my heart was being squeezed by an icy hand. My son could no longer stand. He took a step back, then another, until he collapsed into the armchair behind him, as if his spine had been ripped out. His face was white as a sheet. His lips moved without uttering a word. His gaze was fixed on Chloe, a mixture of horror, guilt, and silent plea. Chloe savored that moment. She was a predator, delighting in her trapped prey. Chloe slowly circled the coffee table, the tips of her red-painted fingers brushing the documents I had just shown. "Your evidence is very good, Mama," she said sarcastically, emphasizing the word mama as if it were an insult, "but it means nothing." She stopped in front of Michael, who was crumbling. "Remember, Michael?" Her voice became sweetly malicious, as if telling an old story. 2 years ago, one rainy October night, on that lonely road to the outskirts that you took as a shortcut to get home after your shift. Each word was a hammer blow. Michael lowered his head, gripping the arms of the chair tightly, his knuckles white with tension. Chloe looked at me, and I saw in her eyes a triumphant cruelty that burned. "Your son, the exemplary traffic agent, the pride of the Jenkins family," she said in a tense voice after a party to celebrate his promotion. "He was drunk. Even so, he drove and hit someone." I felt my heart stop. My whole body went cold. I shook my head in a reflex of denial. "No, it can't be. Michael would never—" "Oh, yes, he would." Chloe interrupted me with a wide smile that showed her white teeth. "He hit a ragged homeless man and fled the scene. He ran away like a coward, ma'am. He left him lying there on the road, in the rain." I felt my legs give way, and I had to lean on the chair to keep from falling. Everything around me began to spin. Chloe continued, her voice full of glee, like a narrator enchanted with her own story. "I started to suspect when I saw him withdraw large amounts of cash every few weeks. I thought he had a lover, so I followed him. But it was worse than that. I saw him drive to a seedy motel on the outskirts of town and hand money to an old man limping with a scared look on his face. Much later, when I was cleaning the storage room, I found this." She took out her cell phone, swiped a couple of times, and showed me the screen. It was a photo of a yellowed notebook page, and on it was that familiar, unmistakable handwriting, my son's. His diary hidden in an old shoebox on top of the wardrobe, where he thought I would never find it. Her voice mocked. He wrote everything there. The fear, the guilt, the obsession. A traffic officer who broke the law, caused an accident, and fled. Think, ma'am. If the Atlanta Journal-Constitution gets this story, what would happen to the career he worked so hard to build? And to the honor of the Jenkins family? I stared at the cell phone screen. Every word written by Michael was like a needle piercing my eyes. My world collapsed in that instant. It was then that Michael finally spoke. His voice was broken, desperate. "Mama, I didn't do it on purpose. That day, I thought I was fine. I went back. I swear, I went back to look for him. Right after, I took him to the hospital, paid his expenses, rented him a house, and took care of him for 2 years, all by myself." He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. "I just didn't report the accident, Mama." His confession was the last stab to my heart. My son, my pride. The man who had always lived righteously had kept a terrible secret. The envelopes of money, the downcast nights, everything. Now it had the most tragic explanation. Chloe put away her cell phone with a completely satisfied expression. She looked at both of us, shattered like a general observing the fall of a fortress. She took the divorce papers, but left all the evidence of her blackmail on the table as a final mockery. She walked toward the door, but stopped for a second on the threshold. "Do you still want to go to court, Mrs. Jenkins?" And she left, closing the door softly. The silence she left was more terrifying than a slammed door. The house, our home, now it seemed like a tomb burying mother and son along with this dreadful secret. I don't know how long I stayed in that silent tomb. A few minutes, a whole hour. Time no longer made sense. Michael remained motionless in his chair, his head between his knees, his body trembling with silent sobs. I wanted to approach, to hug him, to console him, but I couldn't. There was an invisible wall between us, a wall made of hidden truths, of betrayed trust. The disappointment and pain were so great that they overshadowed even a mother's love. I needed air. My chest felt oppressed by a slab. I couldn't breathe. "I'm going out for a while," I murmured, not knowing if my son heard me or not. Then I got up and left the house like a sleepwalker, without closing the door, without carrying my wallet, accompanied only by raw pain. I walked aimlessly. My feet guided me alone. The streetlights of Atlanta began to light up, casting a weak yellow light on the wet sidewalks. The sound of cars, the voices and laughter from nearby restaurants reached me as if from another world, a world to which I no longer belonged. In my mind, only 2 paths remained, both dark alleys. 1. Denounce Chloe, use the irrefutable evidence to unmask her. But doing so would also throw my son into the abyss. His secret would come to light, his career, his honor. Everything would vanish. The second option would be to remain silent, accept defeat. We would have to live forever under Chloe's control, letting a swindler continue unpunished, sucking not only the money but the soul of this family. The words of that strange man in the supermarket echoed again, clear as a knife. Choose what you least want to choose. Now I understood it in all its crudeness. Neither of the 2 options was what I really wanted. Both were nightmares. My feet led me aimlessly through the usual streets, through places I didn't even register. When I looked up, I realized I was at a busy intersection, and in front of me, across the street, was an old bus stop with a rusty tin roof. And then I saw him. He was alone on the worn wooden bench of the stop, drinking coffee from a paper cup under the lamppost. I immediately recognized that gaunt face, marked by life. But something had changed. His eyes were no longer those of someone scared out of their mind, like in the supermarket. They were serene, calm, and at the same time full of deep sadness, as if pushed by an invisible force. I crossed the street, horns blared behind me, but I didn't care. I approached and stood right in front of him, breathless. He looked up. He didn't seem surprised. He looked at me as if he had been there all this time, waiting for me to arrive. "Why?" I asked softly, my voice hoarse from so much I had kept inside. "Why did you warn me that day?" He didn't answer right away. He took a sip of coffee and stared into the void in front of him, where cars passed non-stop. "My name is Elias," he said in a grave, measured voice. 2 years ago, I had no home, no name. I was just a homeless man everyone avoided on the sidewalk. He put the cup aside and lifted his left leg slightly. Under the yellow light, A long, ugly scar appeared on his ankle, pale and wrinkled. "This is what your son left me that rainy night." I stopped breathing. A chill ran down my spine. Everything broke inside me like glass. The man from the supermarket was the victim in the story Chloe told, but he was also the one who took me out of that life, Elias continued, and there wasn't a hint of resentment in his voice. "He came back, ma'am. A few minutes later, he came back. He took me to the hospital. He paid for everything without using insurance. He rented me a small but clean room. Every week, he came to see me. He didn't just give me money. He sat and talked with this lonely old man. He told me about his work, about the stress, and about the wife he was starting to distrust. He looked at me with compassion. He loved his mother very much. Once he showed me an old photo he had in his wallet. It was you. That's why when I saw you at the supermarket, I recognized you immediately. I saw the worry on his face every time he talked about his wife, and I felt that something bad was coming. I felt I had to do something. I could no longer stand. I sat next to him on the cold bench, and finally, the tears I had been holding back since home flowed. Elias looked at me for a long time, and then said thoughtfully, "You know, ma'am, that mistake has punished him for 2 years. He never sleeps peacefully. He told me he doesn't dare look in the mirror because he only sees a coward. That guilt weighs more than a cell. He needs to be free." "So what do I do?" I asked between sobs, like someone who has lost her way. Elias put the empty cup aside. "I still think the same as in the supermarket. Choose what you least want to choose. Denounce your daughter-in-law and let your son face what he did. He deserves to be at peace, not to live with fear or under threats. And that woman, if you stay silent, are you sure there won't be more victims like you and your son?" He stood up, ready to leave. Before doing so, he put his hand on my shoulder, a light pat, but with a lot of weight. "Believe me, ma'am, maybe now he'll hate you for this, but someday he'll thank you." Then he walked away. He blended into the crowd on the street and disappeared. I was left alone on the cold bench under the yellowish light of the bus stop. His words were like a key opening a third door, a door I had never dared to imagine. It was a path full of pain, full of sacrifices, but perhaps it was the only path that led to the light. Finally, I got up. My legs were numb from sitting so long on that icy bench. I could have called a taxi, but I didn't. I wanted to walk home. I needed that journey. I needed that time to think, to reflect, to make a decision that weighed more than my entire life. Every step on the familiar sidewalk was an internal struggle. The usual path now felt endless. I passed by the park, where Michael used to play soccer as a child, and his laughter still seemed to float in the air. I passed by the bakery, where I always bought his tres leches cake for every birthday. The memories came in a rush, sweet and bitter, making the decision I was about to make even more difficult. The love of a mother is to protect or to let her child face the storm so that he can grow. When I arrived home, the clock on the church tower at the end of the street showed almost midnight. The living room light was still on, casting a lonely glow in the darkness. I stood in front of the door for a long time. I took a deep breath to steel myself and then gently pushed it open. The house was strangely silent. Michael was no longer slumped on the sofa. He was standing by the large window, his back to me, looking out at the small garden where the silvery moonlight bathed the bougainvillea. His silhouette looked solitary and burdened, but he was no longer trembling. He stood tall, firm. I entered the room. On the coffee table, the pile of evidence against Chloe remained, along with the divorce document she had left. But now there was something else. A still steaming cup of coffee, and beside it, a carefully folded piece of paper. No, it wasn't folded. It was the divorce document, neatly placed. But there was something different in the last line where Michael Jenkins's signature went. There was already a firm and clear stroke of blue ink. He had signed it. He heard my steps and turned around. His face no longer showed the panic or collapse of that afternoon. Instead, there was a strange calm, a calm that only comes after looking into the abyss and accepting the worst. "Mama," he said softly, with less tremor in his voice. "I've thought a lot while you were out. I don't want to keep running anymore." He walked to the table without looking at the evidence or the document. He took his car keys and wallet that were there. "Tomorrow morning," he said, looking me straight in the eyes. "I'm going to the lawyer's office to hand this in. Then I'll go straight to the precinct to see Captain Miller, my superior. I'm going to tell him everything about the accident 2 years ago." I felt a lump in my throat. A mixture of pain and pride invaded me. I approached and took his hand, a hand hardened by work, but now it felt warm. "Are you sure, Michael? You know this could destroy everything. The career that cost you so much, the honor of our family." He nodded and gently squeezed my hand. For the first time in a long time, I saw clarity in his eyes. Without that cloud of guilt and fear. If living means walking around with my head down every day, startling every time I hear a patrol siren behind me, then that's no longer living, Mama. His voice sounded determined. "I owe Mr. Elias a public apology, and more importantly, I owe myself the truth." He continued, speaking with a firm gaze. "I can't allow someone like Chloe to use my mistake to blackmail us, to turn this house into our prison. Whatever happens, I will accept it. Even if they expel me from the force, even if I have to go to jail, I will accept it." I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. But they weren't tears of pain or disappointment. They were tears of pride. My son, my little son, had finally regained his courage. I hugged him with all my might. A tight hug. I could feel his chest rise and fall with a steady breath, without the repressed anxiety from before. He had found peace even before the real storm arrived. At that moment, I knew we had made a decision together. The least desired decision, the decision to bring everything to light, even if it meant burning it all down. For the first time in many days, I felt a spark of hope. Faint, but real. Freedom had not yet arrived, but it was close. The following days passed like a storm we willingly entered. Just as he said, the next morning, Michael put on his neatly pressed uniform. He kissed me on the forehead and left for the precinct. I didn't go with him. That was his battle. I stayed home, in the living room, clutching the silver crucifix my mother left me, murmuring prayers. I didn't ask for my son to be declared innocent. I only asked for him to have the strength to bear the truth. At the same time, our lawyer, following my instructions, filed the complaint against Chloe with the authorities. Along with the brown envelope full of evidence that Mr. Aranda and I had carefully collected, the legal gears began to turn. The police intervened. Chloe was initially summoned. In front of the investigators, she vehemently denied everything, playing the role of a slandered wife. But when they presented her with the irrefutable bank statements, the comparative photos of forged signatures, and the testimony of the bank employee who confirmed that she had opened the safe deposit box, her mask broke. She was accused of fraud and misappropriation of assets. Meanwhile, Michael's accident file from 2 years ago was reopened. Elias was called to testify. He appeared at the precinct in his cleanest clothes, recounting everything clearly. He hid nothing but stressed that Michael returned immediately, took him to the hospital, and took care of him for the next 2 years. Michael's sincerity, coupled with Elias's compassionate testimony, significantly reduced his sentence. He was not criminally charged, but received an internal sanction. He was demoted and transferred to another unit far away, a price to pay, but fair. Months later, the divorce and fraud trial was held. Michael and I sat in the front row when Chloe was brought in. I barely recognized her. That elegant woman in a cream-colored suit, now she wore a huge inmate's uniform, her hair disheveled and her face gaunt. But when she lifted her face, her gaze was still full of defiance and hatred. The judge granted the divorce. Chloe received no part of the assets. On the contrary, she had to return everything she had stolen. As she was escorted by the police, she did not look at Michael. She looked at me with a burning gaze, promising revenge if she ever had the opportunity. I didn't feel happy. I only felt immense relief, as if a huge stone that had been crushing my chest for years had finally been lifted. A year later, everything had stabilized. The storm had truly passed. Michael was transferred to a small traffic control post on the outskirts, near Lake Lanier. The job was no longer as stressful or full of pitfalls as before. He had time to read the books he liked, to tend a small garden behind the post. His smile had returned. A genuine smile, unforced, without that hidden sadness. I decided to sell the house in Atlanta, that place laden with painful memories. I moved to my parents' old house in Decatur, a quieter place, with cobblestone streets and walls covered with flowers. I spend my days turning the soil, tending and replanting the bougainvillea on the porch. Those flowers that my husband Richard loved when he was alive. Every time they bloom in intense pink or bright violet, I feel as if he is still here, smiling at me. From time to time, Elias takes a bus from the city and comes to visit me. He used the money Michael gave him as compensation, along with his savings, to open a small newspaper stand near his home. He is no longer that gaunt and fearful man from before. He and I sit on the porch, drink coffee, and talk about unimportant things that the rainy season arrived early this year, about the smell of wet earth, or some curious news from the newspaper. He has become a close family friend, a living witness that forgiveness and new beginnings do exist. Every afternoon, when the sun begins to set, I have a habit. I prepare a pitcher of chamomile tea, take it to the wicker armchair on the porch, and sit down to wait. It's not long before Michael's old Volkswagen starts making its characteristic noise on the dirt road at the end of the street. He gets out of the car in his new, simpler uniform that fits him perfectly. He sees me, smiles, and waves. Seeing my son live a peaceful life, without burdens on his soul, I know that that painful decision was the most accurate of my entire life. The storm has passed, and the sky above my roof has cleared. Now that everything has calmed down, that I can sit on the porch and watch the bougainvillea sway under the afternoon sun and listen to Michael's engine approaching from the end of the street, I understand that there are decisions in life that are paid with tears, with wounds, with the crumbling of beliefs we thought unshakable. But it is precisely those decisions, however painful they may be, that are the only ones that lead us to truth, justice, and true peace. I have learned that sometimes loving does not mean covering up or forgiving all mistakes, but having enough courage to push the one you love toward the light, forcing them to face the consequences and to face themselves. Because only by traversing the darkness with one's own feet does a person truly grow, truly become free. And I, a mother, a woman who has already walked through the storm, finally understood. There are wounds that should not be hidden, but accepted to be able to heal. That is the only way to continue living with a light heart and a clear sky ahead. The story you have just heard has been modified in names and places to protect the identity of the people involved. We tell this not to judge, but with the hope that someone will listen and stop to reflect on how many mothers are silently enduring within their own homes. I really wonder, if you were in my shoes, what would you do? Would you keep quiet to maintain peace, or would you dare to face everything to reclaim your voice? I would love to hear your opinion on this story of hurting stories or any suggestions you have to improve our content. May God always bless us. And I am convinced that courage will lead us to better days. Meanwhile, on the final screen, I will leave you with two of the channel's most beloved stories. I am sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.